Today I've got Kellen and Neil on the podcast, and we're talking about go-to-market strategy for startups. So Kellen has had experience with go-to-market with a lot of upcoming startups. Neil has his own startup, right? And he's worked on multiple. And how many you've had have many how many exits? One or two exits?
Two.
Two exits. So that's what we're talking about today. Let me pull up my questions here and we'll get started. So first thing is, how do we create a brand for a new startup?
Yeah, I could go. So that's an interesting one. I was talking to someone just yesterday about this concept of brands and like people brands and company brands, right? And like I'm a really big fan of like people brand building company brands and like company brands like lending to people brands, right? And so I think that if you are a early stage company, you don't have a company brand, like I would lean very heavily on people brands. I was like in early stage, like I was chief of staff of a pre-seed stage startup, and like our company had no one knew who we were, but like the founder and myself and a couple others, posted tons, really leaned on sort of like, here's who we are, here's our why, here's what we're facing. And I think that that sort of built the brand that eventually sort of like combined into what like the company one was, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I definitely like what you said about kind of merging the personal brand with the company brand. In my case, I'm just a one person company, so both are kind of the same. I think the thing I've tried doing differently this time around that's helped a lot in driving traffic for page is kind of like figure out what are the attributes that you have that make you very unique. And then don't be afraid of honing in on that. So I'll give you an example. Like in my previous startup, again, that was just me, but for some reason I wanted to seem a lot bigger than I am. So, I had like chief of staff, I had an AE, I had an SDR, and they were all me under different alias accounts. And someone would reply, I'm like, let me loop in my SDR, let me loop in my AE. And I'd reply like 10 minutes later and stuff. And I don't know, like it's not that fun. You don't really feel that good doing all that stuff. But then with Page, I'm like, okay, I'm a one person company. I don't have VC back, funding. I'm just bootstrapping this and I'm going to share my journey along the way. This is why I chose to go this path. And I think people really resonate with that and resonate with that authenticity, I guess. And so I definitely agree with you on kind of merging those two brands together and trying to be very authentic on any social media.
Nice. And I just add, I actually really like the point about like, go in on like sort of who you are, like what are your attributes, right? I think this is the same for job seekers, but it's sort of like this, the world of brand is like, know who you are, own it, and lean heavily on like the things that you're not. Like maybe, scarcity mindset can tell you like, oh, I should try to like appease to these other types of people. But what I've seen is like the people who go like, look, this is who I am, take it or leave it. Like some people are gonna like it, some aren't, and just share through this lens of like very like abundance of like, hey, it's okay. Not everyone's gonna like this, some will. I think that's where you can build these brands where like you allow yourself to not resonate with some people so that the other people, some people will really resonate with that because they're like, oh, this guy's the one willing to sort of like go outside of, the norm or whatever. And so I just think that's a really good point about like, hey, what are your attributes and like lean in on that heavy.
That's so true. In anything really, like whether it's marketing and you're trying to build a following or building a product and you want to find customers, it's better to have like 100 people love you, they say, than like, 10,000 people kind of like you. And, that is so true, especially when it comes to marketing. So yeah, I agree with you there. Also, one other point I would say on that is I think definitely look at the content that you yourself enjoy viewing and just make more content like that. So like if we look at LinkedIn as an example, until recently, it's kind of been people just talking about the webinar that's coming up or the ebook that launched for their company, and no one wants to read that shit. It's so boring. And like if you look at the engagement on those posts, it gets like 2 likes, right? And it's from their own coworkers. So like, no one likes reading that stuff. So I say like if you have some personality or some content that you want to share that your friends find really interesting or people in your network find interesting, don't be afraid of sharing that on social media as well. I think people tend to resonate with that content a lot more than the boring company content that other people might want you to put out. Definitely.
Yeah, well, that's the problem too, is like so many different companies just don't want to have a position for something. They just want to put out content that you said, like everybody will be like kind of liking it. But those posts only get like one or two comments, right? And so
Mhm.
past companies I've worked at before, the marketing people all get together and they work on their little projects in Canva or whatever. They post it on LinkedIn and then they go back to the company Slack room and they're like, everybody go on and like this post. And they're lucky if even like three or four people from the company actually come back and like it. Right. But we look at companies like Tesla who don't even have paid ads, even though I think they're about to start doing that. Right. I don't think I ever see anything on Tesla's page ever come across my feed, but I always see stuff from Elon come across my feed. Right.
Mhm.
And Elon's following is like 4 or 5 times the size of Tesla's following on all socials, like across everything. So we're talking about branding having your own personal brand, implementing that into your company culture, and then posting is going to drive so much traffic to the company as opposed to having, company content, just posting on company pages.
Yeah, that's so true. I think you make a really good point about people kind of equating like Tesla's brand to just what Elon Musk is. And some of the biggest companies that have a really strong marketing arm, I think, do a great job at this. Apple is probably the most famous for this. I think recently that's kind of changed, but if you look at like between 2008 and 2018, if you ever watched an Apple conference, it was like four people who are always on there. And you think for some reason, like, that's Apple, right? It's like four people, one guy's working on this, one person's working on this. And I don't know, you have some sort of familiarity with them. And I think that just makes you a lot bigger advocate of that company. So yeah, it definitely makes sense to have like some sort of personality within your company that kind of owns a brand.
The second thing I have here is a lot of these teams, and I've been going through this too. Like a lot of companies I've been talking to, probably half of them are startups right now for my job hunt. And they all say the same thing of like, oh, we need salespeople to drive revenue, but we don't have money to hire salespeople. Right. And it becomes a circular problem. So when we have a startup, let's say we're bootstrapping too. How do we get our first salespeople to come on board? And how do we get good salespeople to come on board?
Neil, why don't you take that one first?
Sure. So first of all, I think you got to be thoughtful about when you bring salespeople on board in the first place, especially account executives. It's a lot more straightforward, you could say, of closing a deal than it is sourcing them. And if you don't have any pipeline coming in, if you don't have any top of funnel, you're by definition not going to have anything mid funnel or bottom of funnel. So figuring out how you're going to get people in the door, I think, is a much harder challenge than how are we going to try to close those deals. That being said, I think once you have figured out some sort of repeatable channel of, I could, posting content here yields this many leads, or doing some sort of cold email with this strategy in this market yields this many leads, then it makes a lot more sense to hire sales reps. Also, I found sales reps are like some of the smartest people at figuring out which companies are hot and which ones, may not be, right? Because they kind of have a pulse on the market of this is what people like, this is what people are resonating with, this is what might be really easy or much easier and straightforward to sell rather than something that'll be a lot harder. And I think you'll find that if you are building something that that is pretty understandable and people see the value in, sales reps will actually just reach out to you and ask you how they can help you out, whether it's like helping you out part-time in helping you close deals or just jumping in full-time. So I wouldn't be surprised, like you start posting on social media a little bit, like at least once a week, you'll have somebody reach out to you and it's like, how can I help you out?
Yeah, totally. What came to mind for me when you asked the question, James, is like this. So when I was like working as like fractional head of sales for companies like this, I saw the same situation over and over and over, which is like people who want more sales intuitively will go hire salespeople. Right. And I think like if you don't like Neil was saying, if you don't have a repeatable sales motion, if you don't have a repeatable pipeline generation movement, I think founders need to be very careful about who they entertain and hire, right? Because I know lots of situations where honestly decent reps who had worked in, take a company like a Gong, where it's like, yep, like it's worked out for you, you kind of plug into the system, you do the thing, you're a good sales rep, right? And those people oftentimes will go talk to a startup, like, yo, I know how to generate pipeline, I know how to get meetings, I know how to do all these things. And then you find out like it's a very, 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 very different sales motion. And so to me, I totally agree. Where like when I'm talking to startup founders who are trying to figure out like how to grow their sales motion, it's always like, where are you getting your meetings from? Right. And I think one of the biggest threats for these types of companies is like false positives as well. There's a lot of it's easy to get like a friend to like deploy your product, right? And like give testimonials and
Or a
stuff.
fellow YC company to kind of buy your product and you're like, do I have product market fit here?
Right, right. And I see it all the time where it's like people are like, oh, we have 10 customers. So we're looking for our first salesperson to like really ramp this. And then you go in and you're like, dude, you have 0 customers. Like you have 3 people who are paying you because you're a friend. You have 7 people who have the product and have never used it once. Like you don't know what you're even doing. And so I think it's like, it's really interesting because I know the question is sort of like, how do you go do this? But to me, it's like if you want to grow and like hire salespeople, it's like you need to work out those motions, right? And whether it's something you can do yourself or you go find someone, whether to Neil's point, like maybe you get a part-time salesperson together, be partner, you figure some stuff out, see if it works. Maybe you go work with a service or whatever. But I think in general, it's like don't hire salespeople to solve a sales problem. Hire salespeople to like add fuel to a sales process that's working at least somewhat decently already.
You make a really good point about fuel. And I think you mentioned Gong at some point there. And if you listen to some of the earlier podcasts from Amit Bendoff, who's the founder of Gong. He basically is like, we were closing so many deals within the first 8 months of launching that I just could not keep up with the amount of demand. And so we brought in a sales rep who I think is Chris Orlov, who has this huge
Mhm.
following on LinkedIn now. Of like, why don't you come in here and help me close some more deals? Now that's like such a better place to be because you have crazy product market fit and people are just clamoring to figure out how can we get your product. That's a much better position to be than trying to go out there and convince people to, hear you out in the first place.
Yeah, 100%.
Well, you know what's crazy to me is that I don't think companies realize it's easier to build pipeline revenue than ever right now. Like, not everybody could do it, but the people who can do it could do it at scale faster than a standard rep could. Like, for example,
Mhm.
5 years ago, we're looking at cold callers and like, "Oh, yeah, they book 8 meetings in a week. That's huge," whatever. It's like now we have these complex, which we were talking about this before we started, these complex cold email systems that could book you 10 meetings a day, right? We understand online branding and social presence that could book you X amount of meetings per week. And then pipeline should be worked in layers. You should have SEO, you should have cold callers, you should have cold email. As you structure your org, you should keep on adding these layers to it. Right. And then you have all this pipeline. And like you were saying with Gong, it's like you have so much at a certain point, you're just like, okay, now I need to add more people. Right. You're sustainably adding account executives or inside sales reps, whatever you want to call them, as you start to generate more and more pipeline.
Yeah, it's like throwing gasoline on a fire, right? If you have product market fit, you can make the fire grow even larger. But if you don't have it, it's kind of just dumping gasoline on damp wood.
Yeah, and I think I have seen it so frequently with like it's crazy to me like how prevalent it is to go try to hire sales support to like fix product issues or churn issues or things like that. And I think it kind of makes sense. Like one, I think LinkedIn culture is very like sales oriented, right? So it's like you don't see a lot of people on LinkedIn being like, hey, like if you're not closing deals, like fix your product. Right. It's like, no, like use this phrasing and like all of a sudden, whatever. And
You
so
have to buy, you have to subscribe to my Substack, read my
yeah,
newsletter. And once you do that, then you're golden. Then you're gonna be in
never
Price
lose a
Club
deal
every
yet.
every quarter, baby.
Yeah, it's crazy. And so I think it's just like this weird sort of like it's just it's a it makes sense that people would feel inclined to like try to force things to go that way. And I think it's sort of like the classic like, hey, you gotta understand it's gonna take a lot longer and maybe you gotta put in more work. It's not gonna be so simple as just like throw this band-aid on it, hire a rep, and all of a sudden you're gonna like close a couple deals a month that you've never had before.
The retention piece that you mentioned is the most critical. Like you can get people to buy your product, but if you have churn, if you have even like 10% churn, that is going to destroy your business. So unless you have like really good retention, then getting a lot more people to buy the product is going to yield a lot more churn in the long run.
Yep. I was in a situation before where we were like landing clients, they were churning for lots of different reasons. And again, it was just the like, hey, like, let's, how are we going to get more deals? And it's like, dude, deals are pointless. Like, this is literally wasting our time because we kill ourselves, get someone to sign up, then they get like, they churn, then they get bummed. It's like we're wasting our time. We're not helping.
All right. That actually brings me to the last question I have here. So we're talking about the churn rate. You're looking at companies who, and typically it goes like this. When we look at most software companies, like on average, they start off, they go slow, they go slow, they go slow. And then all of a sudden you see this accelerated growth, right? And then it accelerates more and more. And then eventually they hit a cap point and then start to decline a little bit, right? What is the best way, A, to get our first clients for a software based company? And B, how do we increase retention in LTV?
So in terms of landing the first clients, I kind of experienced this similarly with Page, where for a while there I was just building out the product. Then I started posting a little bit more about it and growth happened pretty quickly. Now, that being said, there was a lot of work that went into figuring out how to make that happen. And I don't think there's a better way of doing that than just talking to customers. If you even talk to one or two people a day, even if they're not interested in your product, being on the phone with them, they'll tell you why they're not interested. At the same time, they may not tell you this, but you can kind of figure out what caught their interest. And that's one of the hardest parts because as someone who's selling the product, as someone who's building the product, you tend to think that it's all these other features or whatever bells and whistles in your product that might be the thing that catches their interest because maybe that is why you're using the product every day. But what retains customers is not always going to be the thing that attracts them to use your product and try it out. And so figuring out what is that positioning, like how do you talk about the product? How do you phrase it in a way where people see this as something that they could fit into their workflow? What kind of customers are you going to be going after? Where do they stay? Where are they active on? Are they active on email? Are they active on LinkedIn? Are they active on Twitter? Figuring out all those channels and And that kind of, those variables will help you much better figure out where to spend time marketing and getting customers in the door. So in terms of getting just the very first customers, I just DM people on LinkedIn that I was already friends with. And I found it really important to not even tell them what my product is. Instead, I would just say, I've noticed some of the problems in the space and I'm thinking about exploring it. Do you want to hop on a call and tell me about your problems? And it turns out people love telling you about their problems, right? And they also love it if you can kind of help them figure it out. So figure out some solution to that. So just go in there, try to figure out what problems people have, ask them to tell you your problems. And then if they seem pretty interested, then you just ask them, hey, who else do you know that's having this problem? Can you name one other person? Make it super easy for them to give you that referral, then go follow up with them. And just like that, within a week, you can have a couple customers.
Yeah, I totally agree with like go find people go sort of I think it goes back to the branding stuff too, where like one of the best to me, like as if you're starting to found a or geez, founding a startup and you're looking to go get initial customers, like I think the best way to do that is wear that brand story. It's like what Neil's saying, where it's like, hey, like I'd be sharing like, hey, like when I was looking at, take whatever, the email sending market, and I saw that a lot of people face this, this, and this. Not sure if that's relevant to you. Like I've been thinking about doing some things like this and this. Would you be open to helping me? Right? And I agree that like sort of making this low friction ask, I think way too frequently again, you'll get people trying to sell early stage products, right? And it's like, dude, if they love it, they will buy it, but chances are they don't love it. And so you need to like de-escalate this down to this very like casual, nice feedback level. And really, I think people need to try to poke their own holes too, right? Like you said, it's like ask them like, what caught your eye? Hey, what do you hate about this? Like, hey, if I asked you to buy this right now, it doesn't seem like you'd be all about it. What would be the two things I'd need to change to flip that? Because I think again, and it's weird because it's like it's a paradox a little bit of like a founder, like they should in theory, they should be like, I really love this market. I'm going to try to serve them. But they inherently are going to become such a product expert that they get way in the weeds. Right. And so I think that there's a lot of value to like really like not even being too certain about what you are and what you're doing and be like, hey, like this is this idea I'm trying to sort of like capture. I'm trying to make impact in this world. And then like again, let these people dictate what that looks like. Because when I've been in situations where I saw like quick iterations that like really impacted like signups and retention and stuff, it was always like very directly addressing like user feedback on things. And then where I've seen that not happen is when it's like you have logs of user feedback and then you're like building other shit, you know?
That phrase that you use, what caught your interest, is so great. And I found a lot of success in just using that phrase when you're doing a product demo, where I think like the earlier version of me would kind of go through like a 2-minute product demo. This is how the app works. And then the worst question you can ask is, do you have any questions?
Yeah.
Because they probably have a ton of questions or they have no questions. They don't know what to say. But if instead you phrase it and say, what caught your interest, then immediately you can kind of figure out both for yourself, what is the best way of positioning this product, but also what did catch their interest. So you can kind of dig deeper into that and really sell them on the feature set or of your product that they find appealing. And that's probably what's going to resonate. That one feature out of the 10 things that you have, then you can just go all in on that when pitching that client and when pitching more clients that are like them.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think that's the big part is like chances are more clients are like them. And so it's like if you're like bulldogging through sales conversations and like not getting conversions, it's like, guess what? Like that's probably most people would feel that way when you're talking to them. And when you take the time to be like, all right, like what do these people actually face? What are the unique things? I'm sure there's a lot more will be facing that same stuff.
Well, I like what we're talking about when we're saying like, there's all these different logs of problems that people submit, but people are, founders are so focused on just building the next feature that no one's really going to care about, right? Like that's the biggest problem that we see.
That's
Can
that
you guys
next
hear my-
feature fallacy, right? You tend to think that if I add this one feature in, everything is going to be great. And then if you're an engineer or you're a founder, you're like, I'm just going to stop selling for 3 weeks, go all in on this feature, and then I'll start marketing again. Or if you work in sales, it's like once product comes out with this feature, then I'll be able to sell the product. And it turns out there's probably people who are already using your product who liked it for that version that they bought a couple months ago when you had a lot less than you do today. So that stands to reason that more people will also find value in what you have now. You continue to iterate on their product, but there is no such thing as a next feature that will kind of, help you get product market fit.
Totally.
It's kind of just like, fix your product so people love it because people got it for a reason. And then when they have it and then you're not delivering on the promise you had because your product sucks, then people are going to leave, right?
Exactly.
The last thing I had was using social media to accelerate growth, but we kind of already talked about that, didn't we?
A little bit.
I think one of the hardest parts of social media is just figuring out which content is going to get a lot of exposure and which ones will lead to conversions. I think anyone will like a meme. Those might get like hundreds of likes, but you'll get like 2 signups from that. And that's probably not worth that much. So there's always this fine balance of how do you educate the market around the problem set that you have some expertise in or you have a solution to, and also to do it in a way where it's not just like a blatant advertisement of trying to get people to try out your product.
Yeah. Well, I think people need to realize too, like, just because your post may not be getting like loads and loads of likes and comments and engagement, your post might be getting enough impressions alone,
Hmm.
right? And there's so many people just kind of lurking around on LinkedIn who will, you know, subscribe to it and inevitably like take a meeting with you or like go to your Calendly and just put time on there, even though they've never engaged with your content before. I think a lot of people fail to realize that. So we base everything on likes and comments. But the fact is, as you keep on producing and cranking out more content, it's almost natural that your clients will start coming to you.
100%.
Yeah, I think Link is interesting, especially because of like like how many people are on there not using it. And I think going back to like false positives, it's like there's sort of like a loud like minority majority being like the people who post all the time sort of shape like culturally what LinkedIn's like. But I always tell people, especially like younger reps who are kind of like getting into things and usually like skeptical of LinkedIn, it's like that's most people I think don't relate to LinkedIn. Like most people don't relate to a lot of the content on there. And so it's like if you're fighting for this tiny slice of people who are like super engaged and probably not your buyers, like you're a sucker. But if you're using it, understanding that like most of the people on that platform that you could be reaching, like are never going to comment publicly. They're probably, whatever. It's like, I think that's the opportunity, and the thing that I've been really amazed by is like how much when I've like allowed myself to sort of go outside of well, it feels like what maybe other people are doing or whatever, I don't know. But, like, you'll get people giving you that feedback of like, "Dude, I'd never, I don't read anyone's stuff. I love your stuff," and things like that,
They'll
And I
DM you. They won't comment it. They'll DM
yeah,
you, and
yeah,
that still makes
exactly.
your day. But
Or you
just
meet
the thing.
them.
Mhm.
I'll meet people in person that, like, I'm aware of, and they'll be like, "Yo, by the way, dude, like, I love your LinkedIn." I'm like, "I didn't even know you're on there."
Mhm.
You know what I mean? And so I think it's just and again, it goes back to the personal branding thing of, like, know who you wanna be, like and I think just, like, unabashedly present yourself that way into the world and just, like but do it from, like, the abundance of, like, it's okay to be who I want to be, not like I'm trying to be the thing that I feel like I'm supposed to have to be like. Because I think that never works, and when people do the former, it, like, really shines, even in ways that are less direct. You know what I mean? It's not like, "Oh, this post I really like, so I'm gonna go sign up," but it's like, just like the affinity you can build and, like, the appreciation among other people and stuff, you get the things like some random person you never talked to, like, gives you a referral one day, and they're like, "Yo, like, this person came to me, I thought of you, here," and you're like, "Holy smokes, like, I didn't even know, like, we knew each other like that," you know?
Yeah, that's so true. Like, especially when you post on there, I think you tend to stay top of mind. So while people may not be engaging with you and signing up right there because of that post, they'll remember you. So if somebody else is like, "I'm having this problem. Do you know of any product that will help me out with this, or any agency that'll help me out with this?" They'll tend to think of the thing that they last saw or the thing that they most commonly see. I think there's some like psychology there. So once you piece that together, then it turns out that pie is a lot bigger than just how many people like that post.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it compounds too over time. And people don't realize this, but like you post something about your product, no one's going to care about it for the first or second or third post. I mean, maybe a handful will, but most people won't. It's a repetition of seeing the same content over and over and over with the same messaging over and over again. And then over time, even the people who kind of hated you at the start are kind of like slowly growing to you. They're like, oh, huh, I didn't know he had that feature, or oh, I didn't know he did this product, or oh, he's really working on this, right? And then they become advocates of your product, right? Then they become like social ambassadors for you, which is pretty cool. And Kellen, you said something a couple minutes ago about like messaging for content. I forget what you said exactly, but like you made me think about something. So I think we talked about this last time we talked too, which is Cole Schaefer has a pretty cool concept for how to build brand messaging for, the companies that he works with. And he always says like, if your company was a person, like what would they look like? How would they talk? What would they wear? How would they walk? How would they do this? What would they eat? Right. And you have an
Mhm.
understanding, like you're getting personality to the product and then you build your messaging around that. So
Yeah.
the opposite, which is what we don't want to do, is like having our company page or even our personal page sound like just this repetitive cliche standard founder or sales rep or whatever it might be, but instead having something that fits that, personalized branding.
Yeah, I also think too, like, even and this is, like, more like vanilla, but it's like, if you post about your product too much, like, it's, like, very, like like there's like this monotone to the idea like this person doesn't know anything. They're like, they're just a pass through from like the marketing team. Where it's like if you can take the concept of what your product does and like every single day like promote it in different ways and like give new stories and angles and this and analogies, it's like you start to come off as this expert where it's like, oh, like this guy doesn't just know how to say the things I just taught him like a week ago. It's like this guy could chop it up and like actually solve their problems. And I think it's what so there's a lot of like there's things that are popular, right? And like one of the things I tell people I coach is like one of the best pattern interrupts is competence, right? Like it's like, hey, you want to cut through every little tactic ever, just be really, really, really competent. Like know how to speak your buyer's language super well, know their role, like know their problems, know what they care about. Yeah. So I think that there's just that.
Yeah. I think one thing I've learned recently is I think stage one of trying to promote a product is this is what my product does. Stage two is this is how other people are using it. And that is the thing that I think resonates a lot more because there's so many tools that are out there. But the question is always, how do I best use this tool to do better at my job? And the more you can educate the market on that statement, then the better off you'll be. And I think the more people will be more inclined to sign up with your product then because they now know what they need to do with it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. There's this framework I learned in college, believe it or not, that is called the brand resonance pyramid, right? And it's like 4 stages of like how to build a brand. And it's like salience at the bottom, like what do you do? And I think it's like performance, like how we do it, attitudes, how we feel about it. And then the top is like resonance, right? And part of the model that I think is really interesting, that I think relates back to what you're saying is like they teach you like you can't skip steps. And I think a lot of companies actually try that too, where it's like if you're building your brand and you just try to jump straight to like this like resonance, like relationship and active, and it's like, wait, but like what are you do? Like what do you do? Like what are you? Who are you? Like, it doesn't work. And so it's sort of it's exciting to think of the world where like once your brand can be like doing all these cool things and events and promotions and stuff. But it's like you said, day one, it's just there's a case study I watched on like Dove soap, and like early Dove soap commercials would be like, they just say Dove soap, it suds the skin. And they'd say that like over and over and over and over and over and over and over because they're just like Dove soap, suds skin. Boom, that's it. Right. And then over time, it moves up and up. And like the campaign that we watched for Resonance was like executives' daughters talking about beauty. It didn't talk about cleanliness or soap or anything once. And the idea was like, because they've worked their way up, they can do this type of marketing like that. That's like this kind of like social lens. And it still hits because people know who Dove soap is and what it does. And so it makes them feel good about them, but not confused.
Yeah. Yeah, you're totally right. I think that marketing angle is more important now than ever before. I think like 15 years ago, just having a product on the internet was pretty interesting and people wanted to sign up for it. Even like 10 years ago when I was building apps, the fact that you had a mobile app was pretty cool and interesting. Nowadays, for any given product, there's like 10 different competitors. I think you mentioned Gong. We're using a competitor to Gong right now.
Yeah.
And it's like there's so many different products out there that kind of do the same thing. And so how do you differentiate yourself? Well, you got to figure out some way of building some brand around it because at the end of the day, people are going to create this matrix, maybe in their head, maybe on paper if they're buying at a big enterprise, and they won't really compare the features and benefits. They might, but at the end of the day, they're going to go with the product of I've heard that product a lot more than I've heard these other
Yeah.
two, or these other three, or these other 10. So I'm probably going to go with that one. And turns out that one post or all that content that you put out there is going to make the difference in getting people to purchase from you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
Well,
Lavender is like
oh,
a
go
really
ahead.
good model. Well, just like for posting a lot, like to me, that's Lavender. Like Lavender's done such a good job. Like I remember super early on when it was like brand, new product, like, and I wasn't, I was like, all right, cool. This is like whatever. But like seeing how much that they would spend time like post, whatever, to me, it's like the master class because it's basically like those guys could probably sell anything and it like eventually would have worked just based on like the way they engaged, with the market and sort of, how they followed the thread of like what people wanted.
It's funny because it's almost a popularity contest. Like, how can
Totally.
you how can you get the attention of everybody, right? And we're talking about brand resonance. I want to go back to that because I think that's, and it might be wrong. Pretty sure that's the brand letter by Marty Newmeyer, I think. And
It could be.
it might be. I might be wrong about that. I never know. But anyway, when we're talking about that, people get confused about what like an actual brand is. They think, oh, a brand is my social media. It is a promise I make. It is the content I put out. And they have all these different ideas for it. But a brand is like, and this is Marty's definition of a brand. It's like the gut feeling that you have about a product or service, right? You have
Mhm.
this idea of what they are. And so like before even walking through the door of a company, you're familiar with the brand already. You already know what it's going to be, right? Seth Godin always says it too. Like you if Nike opened up a hotel, like, you know exactly what that hotel is gonna look like, right? That's a brand. That's like a real brand. So we're going over a few minutes here. So let's wrap up with this. So, like, for people who are just getting into that, founder scene, right? They're just starting their own companies. What advice do we have for them?
Take the last piece of content that you created for your friends and just post that on LinkedIn that they really liked.
Nice. I would say mine is just be more focused on like the market you serve than your product. Just be really, really, really like obsessed with those people and like yeah, curious.
All right, perfect. Well, this is episode 26, the Hypersales podcast. Next week we have Grayson Hogard from,
He's the GOAT, the cookie
yeah,
man
he is
himself.
the cookie man. And I forgot his cookie name for a second. We have to
Grove,
cut this.
grove,
Grove. That's right. Yeah.
grove.
All right. So this is episode 26. Next week we have Grayson Hogard coming on the show from Grove Cookies. We're talking about cookies as a service. So, and again, this has been Kellen K. Spear and Neil Gandhi from Page and Kellen, forgive me. I forget the name of your company.
Yeah, no worries. Clio Choir.
Cly Acquire. Perfect. All right. All right, guys. Well, thank you for hopping on. And then again, next week we got Grayson Hogard.